Welcome back to the Constitutional Clarion. In this video, I'm going to try and give an answer to a question that often gets raised, and that is whether the voice referendum will give special rights to Indigenous Australians that are not held by other Australians. Now, I was asked that question as a member of the Constitutional Expert Group that was advising the government's referendum working group on the Constitution. And my colleagues and I all unanimously decided, no, we don't think that the referendum change to the Constitution does give those rights. However, it's a very strongly held belief amongst other people that they do. So let me at least try and explain to you my reasoning for thinking that actually the amendment doesn't do that. Now, the first thing as a lawyer I'm going to do is look at the text. So what does the amendment actually say? And if you have a look at it, it doesn't refer to individual rights at all. What it does is it creates a body, or requires the body to exist, and then it says that that body may make representations to the executive government and to Parliament. But it doesn't give rights to any individual. Okay, at most it gives rights to a body, but not to any individuals. But then you might say, okay, well, hang on a minute. There are individual Indigenous people who would have the right to elect this body. Okay, well then let's go back and have a look at the words again. And where in the amendment does it say that there is a right for an Indigenous person to elect this body? Okay, it's not there. Where is the power given? Well, it's given to Parliament under the third paragraph to make laws about how this body is comprised. Now, Parliament could, well, legislate to give Indigenous people the right to elect this body, or it could decide that the body and its members would be chosen in other ways. Okay, we don't know. That's going to be a matter for Parliament. But the amendment itself does not give rights to anyone in relation to an election. So then you say, okay, all right, it doesn't directly give rights in relation to election, but it at least facilitates the ability for Parliament to do that. Yes, but then again, Parliament can do that anyway. There's nothing new here, because remembering Parliament could use the race power, which it did under section 5126, to allow Indigenous Australians to elect ATSIC. Okay, so no new power here. And in any event, it doesn't give rights to individuals. So the next argument here is, okay, if it doesn't give rights to individuals, it does give a right to this body, which is going to be comprised of individuals and probably chosen by them. Okay, yes, it does give rights to a body. And what are those rights? Well, they're the right to make representations to the Parliament and to the executive government. But the problem is that a special right that other people don't have? Well, no, it's not, because you and I and everybody else and organisations as well, we can all make representations to Parliament and the executive. We can do it by writing a letter to our Member of Parliament. We can do it by petitioning Parliament. We can do it by making a submission to a parliamentary committee. We can do it by writing to a minister or a person who performs an executive statutory office. We can all do that. And there's no law that stops us from doing that, is there? So the voice is getting the same right that all of us already have. But then you say, but it's a special right because the voice is protected by the Constitution, and that means that Parliament can't take away its right to make those representations to the executive and to Parliament. True, but can Parliament take away your right to do so? And the reality is not really. No, it can't, because there's also constitutional protection for you and your rights as well. And that comes from something called the implied freedom of political communication. And what that means is that if Parliament enacts a law that burdens your freedom of political communication, being your ability to communicate with Parliament and the executive about political matters, then that law will be constitutionally invalid unless it's done for what's described as a legitimate purpose, which is something that has to be compatible with the system of representative and responsible government. Okay, so that could be the purpose of trying to prevent corruption, for example, or the purpose of protecting the judicial system, like a law about contempt of court, for example, or the purpose of protecting a person's right to maintain their reputation, so laws of defamation. So there may be a legitimate purpose that's consistent with the system of representative and responsible government, but even then, the law will only be valid if the law is proportionate to achieving that particular purpose. I won't go through the whole proportionality test, but lawyers amongst you will know it is long, complex and tedious. Ultimately, you and I and other organisations have a right to make our representations to Parliament and the Executive, which is constitutionally protected, just as the voice also has the ability to do that in a way that's constitutionally protected. Is there any significant difference between the two? Now, there might arguably be some teensy differences that arise because of those rules about legitimate expectations and proportionality tests. But to be honest, I've never seen anyone do that kind of analysis, and it's certainly not what people are arguing about when they're talking about special rights. And in any event, the implied freedom of political communication would also apply to laws in relation to the voice, and under section 129.3, Parliament does have the power to regulate laws in relation to the voice. So my bet is that in the end, the High Court, if it ever needed to deal with it, would probably merge the two tests so that they are exactly the same. So in the end, what do people really mean? What's their complaint when they say that this voice referendum will give special rights to Indigenous people that they don't have themselves? The answer is probably that they feel that the voice will have more influence over Parliament and government than they, as an individual, can have. And from that point of view, they're probably right. It probably will be more influential, at least at the beginning, because it will have the force behind it of the vote of the Australian people and their support, and that will give it a deal of influence. Later on, its influence will probably depend upon the quality of the representations that it makes. Is it saying things that are sensible and useful, and therefore does it garner respect? Influence, however, is not a special right. Influence can be achieved in a number of different ways. I sometimes have influence in relation to representations to Parliament simply because of my expertise. If I work within my expertise, I will have some influence, but outside my expertise, probably none. Most of us as individuals have very little influence, and that's why we get together in collective groups. And so there'll be groups like trade unions or business organisations or ethnic groups or religious groups, etc., to try and get a little bit more influence. Influence can be achieved by other ways. Having oodles of money is a good way of getting influence, particularly if you make very large donations to a political party. So yes, influence can be disproportionate for a number of different reasons. But the bottom line is, it's not an issue here about one group of people or individuals having special rights that other people don't have. We all have the ability to make representations to Parliament and the executive government. And really the question is simply one of whether or not one group might have a little bit more influence as a consequence of the creation of the voice than others. But if you think about it, the voice is there to represent people who have historically been the most marginalised and disadvantaged people in our nation. And so giving them a little bit more influence so that their voices can be heard about the matters that affect them is probably not such a problem. Anyway, that's my explanation for why I don't think, at least from a legal point of view, that this voice referendum is giving to Indigenous Australians as individuals rights that we, other Australians, don't have. I don't think it's giving anyone special rights, but that's my view and you may well differ. Thank you for watching the Constitutional Clarion, and I hope to see you next time.